Deere & Company is responding to former President Donald Trump's threat to put a 200% tariff on products the company tries to sell into the U.S.
When John Deere CEO John May disclosed that the company would shut down its U.S. production and move operations abroad, it sent a shockwave through the agricultural sector and manufacturing heartland. The announcement arrived in the wake of newly elected President Donald Trump's sweeping tariff measures on key trading partners. Those reciprocal duties, imposed by Europe, Canada, and Mexico in retaliation, have raised the cost of both exporting American-made equipment and importing crucial parts, placing unprecedented financial strain on domestic manufacturers. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Every John Deere facility in the United States, from its historic plant in Moline, Illinois, to its sprawling campus in Waterloo, Iowa, has embodied the spirit of American industry for generations. For farmers, these factories represented more than steel and paint. They stood as symbols of national pride and craftsmanship. The decision to shutter these operations, then, is as much a symbolic shift as it is a business move. It marks a turning point where the calculus of cost, politics, and globalization outweighs a century-long tradition of homegrown manufacturing. At the core of this seismic shift lie the tariffs that President Trump enacted under the banner of protecting American jobs and rebalancing trade deficits. Imposed at a rate soaring past 20% on steel and aluminum and matched by even steeper levies on machinery and parts. Those duties aimed to pressure trade partners into renegotiating deals perceived as lopsided. Instead, they prompted retaliatory action. European and North American neighbors slapped their own duties on agricultural equipment, effectively doubling production costs for any harvesters, planters, or tractors shipped from the United States. For John Deere, a company that depends on a finely tuned supply chain stretching across borders, these tariffs translated into a massive, immediate expense. Critical components sourced from Canadian foundries, German hydraulic suppliers, and Mexican fabricators suddenly carried elevated duties. Simultaneously, European customers found American-manufactured tractors suddenly priced out of their markets, with profit margins evaporating almost overnight. Leadership confronted a stark choice: absorb crushing tariffs and incur unsustainable losses, or relocate assembly and finishing facilities to countries where trade with frontline partners remains tariff-free. When May convened the board, the analysis painted a forbidding picture. Continued operations on U.S. soil under the new tariff regime would shrink margins to the point that reinvestment in technology and innovation would grind to a halt. At the same time, competitors based in Europe and Asia could undercut John Deere's prices in crucial markets, further eroding share. Relocating production to tariff-exempt facilities in Mexico or Central Europe offered a path to competitive pricing and supply chain resilience, albeit at a significant cost in domestic jobs. The immediate reaction from the heartland was visceral. Town halls in Deere-dependent communities swelled with anger and disbelief. Generations of families, whose livelihoods depended on assembly lines and machining centers, now faced unemployment and uncertainty. Local suppliers, from bolt makers to welding shops, braced for cascading cutbacks. Schools that relied on tax revenues generated by these plants contemplated budget shortfalls. Suddenly, a decision made in corporate boardrooms hundreds of miles away felt as personal and consequential as any national policy debate. Politically, the move threatened to undercut the administration's protectionist narrative. Campaign pledges to bring jobs back and make America strong again rang hollow for workers who watched their employers ship jobs south of the border or to low-cost European sites. Opponents of the president seized on the situation to highlight the unintended consequences of blunt trade tools. Even within the ruling party, murmurs of discontent grew louder as blue-collar voters confronted the reality that tariffs can both protect and destroy. Beyond the immediate shock to workers, the shift signaled a broader erosion of American manufacturing identity. John Deere's green and yellow tractors have long symbolized the ingenuity and independence of U.S. farmers. With production moving abroad, those tractors on the fields and the generations of technicians who maintain them will be tied to plants beyond America's borders. Over time, the technological expertise nurtured in Illinois and Iowa may migrate as well, carried by engineers following the production lines to new sites. Globally, the relocation recalibrates supply chain flows. Parts that once traveled south from Canada into the U.S. will reroute to Mexican assembly plants. Assemblies from newly established European hubs will feed markets across the continent without the hindrance of punitive fees. This network realignment could enhance efficiency in some respects, but it also deepens dependencies on foreign labor markets and regulations. In turn, it reshapes geopolitical leverage. Nations hosting John Deere's new plants will gain additional bargaining power vis-à-vis Washington. Competition in the agricultural machinery sector stands to intensify. European giants like CNH and AGCO, along with Japanese and Korean upstarts, will watch John Deere's play with keen interest. Those competitors already operate on a global footprint, toggling plants among regions to optimize cost structures. With Deere joining their ranks in overseas manufacturing, price wars could emerge in both developed and emerging markets. The result may be accelerated consolidation in the industry as smaller players struggle to match pricing or technological investment. Currency fluctuations further complicate the narrative. A stronger dollar, often driven up by interest rate rises designed to tame tariff-driven inflation, exacerbates export challenges. By shifting production to euro or peso zones, John Deere can align costs more closely with revenues from those markets, yet foreign exchange risk never disappears. New exposures to the euro-dollar and peso-dollar rates introduce volatility into Deere's global financial forecasts, requiring sophisticated hedging strategies and potentially dampening the financial gains promised by relocation. The ripple effects extend beyond agriculture. Tariffs have injected uncertainty into sectors ranging from automotive to electronics, and John Deere's decision underscores the fragility of domestic manufacturing. Other large U.S. corporations will study this move as a precedent. Multinationals with assembly lines in the U.S. might now consider relocation as not merely an option, but a necessary safeguard against unpredictable trade wars. In turn, such a trend could hollow out broad swaths of American industry, leaving behind idle factories and diminished tax bases. Yet, the move also delivers a message to Washington. The architecture of global trade is complex and interdependent. No single nation can isolate itself without inviting retaliation. When the U.S. imposes punitive duties, it unleashes a chain reaction that ultimately boomerangs back onto domestic stakeholders. John Deere's pivot illustrates how quickly well-intentioned economic policy can upend strategic, long-term investments, turning allies in food production into skeptics of U.S. policymaking. As the election cycle unfolds, this episode will occupy center stage in debates about economic nationalism versus globalization. Candidates of all stripes will cite John Deere's plight as evidence either of reckless free trade agreements that surrender American sovereignty or of ill-considered protectionism that undermines domestic industry. Grassroots farmers, traditionally bastions of conservative politics, will grapple with a sense of betrayal. The party that promised to defend their livelihoods has overseen a policy that drove manufacturing abroad. At the state and local level, officials scrambled to respond. Governors convened emergency task forces to attract replacement industries or to cushion the blow with retraining programs. Some states, with more diversified economies, may cushion the impact, but in rural counties, where John Deere was often the single largest employer, seismic shifts in employment could depress local GDP for years. The specter of company town decline, long thought relegated to coal country, now threatens Midwestern farm communities as well. Meanwhile, recipients of John Deere's production bounty, governments in Mexico, Poland, or the Czech Republic, ready incentives and workforce development schemes to secure the incoming operations. They pitch lower labor costs, tax breaks, and expedited permitting processes. For them, tariffs imposed by the US represent an opportunity to flip investment flows in their favor, strengthening their own manufacturing ecosystems and gaining new footholds in advanced machinery production. Environmental and regulatory considerations also come into play. Relocated production facilities may fall under jurisdictions with different emission standards, labor laws, and waste disposal rules. While the immediate cost savings are alluring, John Deere must navigate a patchwork of local regulations. Conversely, some international sites offer incentives for green manufacturing and renewable energy integration, potentially accelerating Deere's own sustainability goals in ways that US facilities constrained by legacy infrastructure could not match. Strategically, the shift positions John Deere for a more diversified global footprint. The company can now balance production across multiple regions, minimizing the impact of localized disruptions, whether they stem from political decisions, natural disasters, or public health crises. A modular manufacturing approach, with standardized equipment and interchangeable teams, emerges as the new norm. This resilience, however, comes at the cost of deeper ties to economies that lack the political stability of the United States. Further compounding the upheaval was the effect on John Deere's research and development pipeline. For decades, the company's global innovation centers collaborated seamlessly, melding insights from soil scientists in Illinois with robotics experts in Germany. With production sites now dispersed, Deere's engineers must adapt to a matrix of time zones, languages, and regulatory environments. Projects, once managed end-to-end within a unified network, are now splintered across continents. Coordinating trials for next-generation autonomous tractors requires shipping prototypes back and forth under customs scrutiny, while firmware updates must accommodate hardware variations tailored to local suppliers' specifications. This fragmentation threatens the rapid prototyping cycles Deere once took for granted, potentially slowing the rollout of precision agriculture technologies that many farmers have come to expect. The reshaping of Deere's supply chain also reverberates through logistics corridors. Container traffic patterns shift as chassis now originate in Mexican ports rather than the Mississippi River network. Rail yards in Iowa, once bustling with inbound components and outbound harvesters, now run idle, while intermodal hubs in Lázaro, Cardenas, and Gdansk ramp up operations. Trucking companies must forge new routes across Central America's highways or Europe's autobahns, navigating customs posts that require digital declarations and physical inspections. Freight forwarders scramble to optimize loads and avoid demurrage fees, passing increased costs onto manufacturers or absorbing thin margins. These logistical adjustments not only demand new contracts and partnerships, but also risk creating bottlenecks in ports and rail terminals unaccustomed to agricultural machinery volumes on this scale. Beyond engineering and logistics, Deere's human resources functions undergo a radical transformation. Talent acquisition teams that once recruited mechanical engineers in Illinois now seek candidates versed in multilingual project management and cross-border compliance. Relocation packages for U.S. employees become commonplace, as certain specialists choose to follow assembly lines to new sites rather than severe long-standing relationships. Conversely, Deere must invest heavily in local training programs to upskill regional workforces in Mexico or Eastern Europe, bridging gaps in advanced manufacturing techniques. Language courses, cultural integration workshops, and technical apprenticeships proliferate, while centralized HR systems expand to manage payroll compliance in multiple currencies and jurisdictions. These initiatives represent a significant departure from the company's traditional model, where local hiring sufficed for most plant operations within a single regulatory regime. Financially, the company's investors face a more complex risk profile. Previously, Deere's earnings reports largely reflected US dollar revenues and costs, offering transparent exposure for shareholders. Now, multi-currency earnings emerge from pesos, euros, and possibly even zlotys, requiring sophisticated hedging strategies to smooth quarterly fluctuations. The finance team institutes layered derivative contracts, forward contracts, options, and swaps to guard against currency swings that could erode profit margins. Credit agencies re-evaluate Deere's ratings, factoring in geopolitical risk premiums for each manufacturing jurisdiction. Lenders impose covenants tied to foreign exchange thresholds, while equity analysts adjust price targets to account for potential currency translation losses. Institutional investors demand detailed breakdowns of region-specific cash flows and an explanation of how Deere plans to maintain return on invested capital in an environment where currency volatility may be the norm. At the same time, Deere confronts evolving expectations around environmental stewardship. While U.S. facilities were bound by federal and state-level emissions controls, newly adopted sites in other countries may operate under looser regulations or, in some cases, stricter ones if host governments leverage sustainability to attract investment. Deere's sustainability officers must craft a cohesive global environmental policy that satisfies stakeholders across varied contexts. Reducing carbon footprints of assembly operations becomes a priority, possibly through on-site renewable energy installations or investments in carbon offsets. Materials sourcing strategies shift to emphasize recycled steel or low-embodied carbon polymers, attempting to harmonize standards across all plants. Failure to maintain consistent environmental performance risks, alienating socially responsible investors and prompting negative press in both home and host countries. Meanwhile, farmers in emerging markets perceive an opportunity. With local plants supplying machines optimized for regional soil conditions and crop types, farmers gain access to equipment tailored to their needs at lower price points. Deere's marketing divisions capitalize on this trend by promoting local build, global quality messaging, emphasizing shorter service response times and region-specific attachments. Dealers in Brazil, India, and Eastern Europe expand offerings, stocking parts in nearby warehouses rather than importing them from the US. This shift fosters deeper penetration into developing agricultural economies, where mechanization rates have lagged behind Western counterparts. In turn, Deere establishes early mindshare among a new generation of farmers, potentially locking in brand loyalty and offsetting lost volume in traditional markets. Yet, this market diversification also introduces complexity in after-sales service. Deere's support network, once centralized around North American call centers, must scale to serve technicians in multiple languages and time zones. Technical manuals require translation and localization, incorporating region-specific safety standards. Remote diagnostic tools, which rely on secure internet connections, must navigate varying telecommunications, infrastructures, and data privacy laws. Deere's digital platform team works overtime to ensure that cloud-based analytics services comply with the European Union's GDPR regulations, Mexico's data protection statutes, and any industry-specific cybersecurity requirements. The cost and complexity of maintaining a unified IoT ecosystem for precision agriculture grows significantly as Deere accommodates a patchwork of legal landscapes. Corporate governance also takes on an international dimension. Deere's board, historically composed primarily of US-based executives and independent directors, considers adding members with expertise in European trade law or Latin American economic policy. Audit and compliance committees expand to oversee multi-jurisdictional anti-corruption measures, bribery risk assessments, and ethics training. Internal audit teams must become adept at cross-border audits, traveling to remote locations or conducting remote assessments in times of travel restrictions or health emergencies. Compliance with the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act remains paramount, but now is supplemented by obligations under the UK Bribery Act and equivalent statutes in host countries. Deere's legal department evolves into a truly global practice, balancing local statutes against the company's overarching integrity policies. The shift also invites scrutiny from international bodies and trade organizations. As Deere migrates production to tariff-free regions, competitors may file new complaints with the World Trade Organization, alleging circumvention of duties or unfair subsidy practices. Host governments, having offered tax incentives or infrastructure investments to secure Deere's plants, might come under scrutiny for distorting competitive conditions in the agricultural equipment sector. Deere must manage these external risks through transparent negotiations, preemptive disclosures, and adherence to international trade agreements. Lobbying efforts in Brussels, Ottawa, and Mexico City intensify as Deere seeks to lock in favorable treatment and forestall future retaliatory measures. This relocation extends to Deere's corporate social responsibility initiatives in the U.S. Deere's charitable arm, long known for scholarships and community grants in rural communities, now must balance commitments between legacy regions and new host communities eager for corporate engagement. Grant-making strategies expand to support STEM education in Guadalajara or vocational training in Wrocław, Poland, while maintaining scholarship programs in Moline and Waterloo. Creating equitable impact across disparate locales presents both logistical and philosophical challenges. How to distribute resources fairly when the number of employees and the scale of operations differ vastly from one country to another. Deere navigates this by establishing a global CSR framework that allocates funds based on workforce size, community needs assessments, and strategic alignment with local educational institutions. Turning to the credit markets, Deere's bond issuances embrace a new profile. The company taps the euro-denominated bond market to fund facility expansions in Europe, issuing green bonds specifically earmarked for pollution control upgrades or renewable energy installations at new plants. In Latin America, it explores peso-denominated bonds, giving local investors pension funds, insurance companies, and sovereign wealth entities a stake in Deere's growth story. These instruments diversify Deere's funding sources and reduce reliance on US dollar debt. Yet they also demand greater transparency in financial reporting under multiple accounting standards, including IFRS and local GAAP. Meanwhile, Deere's corporate identity evolves in the public's eye. No longer purely an American icon, the company rebrands itself as a global enterprise rooted in agrarian heritage, but branching into modern, borderless manufacturing. Marketing materials shift from scenes of Midwestern prairies to include wide shots of Mexican factories humming with activity and Polish engineers inspecting weld seams. This reimagined narrative aims to appeal to international customers and investors, yet risks alienating core constituencies who cherish Deere's American legacy. The challenge for leadership is to forge a unified brand voice that honors the past while embracing a more complex present. Within agricultural policy circles, policymakers take notice of Deere's move as they craft future legislation. U.S. senators and representatives analyze the domino effect of tariffs on domestic employment and economic growth, debating proposals to incentivize reshoring or to provide transition assistance for displaced manufacturing workers. Congressional hearings on trade policy feature Deere executives testifying alongside union leaders and competitive trade experts. Proposals emerge for tariff exemptions on essential components, partial duty drawbacks, or targeted tax credits to offset relocation pressures. Yet consensus remains elusive in a polarized environment where free trade advocates and protectionists tug in opposite directions. Complementing this effort, Deere's Digital Services division seeks to deepen its subscription offerings. An array of telematics, predictive maintenance algorithms, and over-the-air firmware updates now becomes the linchpin for ensuring uptime. As physical parts may take days or weeks to arrive, farmers subscribe to real-time diagnostic dashboards that flag component degradation before failures occur, while remote specialists guide local mechanics through repairs via augmented reality headsets. This pivot towards service plus software revenue hedges against the unpredictability of hardware production and bolsters customer loyalty. Yet it also thrusts Deere into stiffer competition with pure-play agricultural tech startups and software giants eyeing the booming precision farming market. Meanwhile, academic collaborations come under review. For years, Deere has funded research chairs in mechanical engineering and robotics at U.S. universities, nurturing talent that often transitioned into corporate roles. As manufacturing shifts abroad, the incentive to maintain these U.S.-based research partnerships weakens. Conversely, Deere may ramp up grants at technical institutes near new plant locations, such as engineering faculties in central Mexico or Poland. This redistribution of research dollars influences the pipeline of skilled graduates. Fewer American students will gain hands-on exposure to Deere's manufacturing challenges, while their counterparts abroad gain practical experience tied directly to assembly operations. The long-term effect may be a gradual migration of agricultural engineering expertise away from traditional U.S. centers of excellence. At the same time, Deere's procurement strategies evolve. Bulk purchasing agreements with steel mills and component vendors, formerly centered on North American suppliers, now diversify across global partners, sourcing low-carbon steel from Baltic mills, ordering bearings from Southeast Asian specialists, and engaging local foundries in Latin America. Each carries unique price and quality profiles. Deere's procurement teams must craft layered supplier risk matrices that account not only for cost and capacity, but also for political stability, currency volatility, and environmental compliance. In some instances, Deere enters joint ventures with local manufacturers, sharing equity to secure priority production slots and ensure adherence to corporate quality standards. Investor activism surfaces as a fresh dynamic. Some large institutional shareholders express concerns that the relocation strategy, while beneficial in the near term, exposes Deere to regulatory shifts in host countries. They press for a detailed country risk report that quantifies potential impacts from changes in labor laws, trade policies, or geopolitical tensions, environmental regulations, or political leadership abroad. Shareholder resolutions call for strengthened oversight and dual reporting metrics, one set reflecting traditional US GAAP earnings, another illustrating IFRS-based projections that include local taxes, subsidies, and compliance costs. Deere's management responds by creating a new transparency dashboard in its annual report, providing granular segment disclosures for each manufacturing region, including workforce statistics, carbon emission data, and compliance audit outcomes. Simultaneously, the used equipment market experiences a shift as new tractors and combines rollout of overseas plants. Surplus U.S. inventories accumulate. Dealers unable to move machines quickly in domestic markets now saturated by tariffs turn to global remarketing channels. Auctions in ports along the Gulf Coast and Pacific Northwest see American-made units sold to exporters at discounted prices, ready to ship to regions where they remain competitively priced. This flow affects resale values, driving down trade-in credits for farmers seeking to upgrade. Deere's financing arm introduces more aggressive leasing options to clear dealer lots, zero-down leases, rate buy-downs, and deferred payments. While this stimulates short-term sales, it also raises questions about residual values and credit risk if lessees face financial distress in an environment of variable commodity prices and rising interest rates. On the competitive front, Deere's rivals reassess their own manufacturing footprints. Some European producers, noting Deere's successful migration, expedite their own capacity expansions in Mexico and Eastern Europe. Japanese and Korean firms eye joint ventures in Southeast Asia, creating a mosaic of global assembly nodes that echo the just-in-time philosophy, but on a truly transcontinental scale. Deere counters by touting its scale advantages. Global R&D budgets exceeding those of any competitor, a dealer network that outstrips rivals in both breadth and depth, and a brand heritage that resonates even amidst shifting production geographies. Advertising focuses on the tagline, "Engineered globally, backed locally," emphasizing that regardless of where a tractor is built, Deere's dealer technicians remain embedded in local communities. Regulatory affairs intensify in the corridors of power. In Washington, legislators draft the Manufacturing Resilience Act, proposing tax credits for companies that maintain a minimum percentage of domestic content and invest in automated production technologies that keep jobs on U.S. soil. Proponents cite Deere's exodus as evidence that, without such incentives, even stalwart American brands will chase lower costs abroad. Yet the bill faces steep opposition from free trade advocates and fiscal hawks wary of adding to the deficit. In parallel, the U.S. Department of Commerce examines whether de minimis thresholds for small-value shipments could be adjusted to facilitate the flow of spare parts, acknowledging the unintended friction imposed by stringent customs regimes. International diplomacy likewise weaves into the narrative. Embassies in Mexico City and Warsaw amplify Deere's investments as proof of economic partnership with the United States, countering narratives of an America withdrawing from global engagement. Trade attachés host factory tours for policymakers to demonstrate high-tech manufacturing and community benefits. These diplomatic efforts aim to cement political goodwill in host nations, insulating Deere from sudden policy reversals or local pushback. At the same time, U.S. diplomats advocate for tariff relief on agricultural equipment in multilateral forums, attempting to delineate a carve-out for farm machinery, even as they continue broader negotiations on steel and aluminum. In parallel, Deere's executive leadership refines its corporate narrative to address employee concerns. Virtual town hall forums connect the CEO with workers across continents, sharing data on safety performance, productivity gains, and community investments. Deere introduces a global intranet platform, branded My Deere World, where employees access the latest corporate updates, contribute ideas through innovation challenges, and recognize peers in different countries for outstanding achievements. These cultural integration efforts seek to forge a sense of shared destiny, despite the geographic dispersion of staff and the contrasting socio-economic contexts in which they live. The burgeoning field of supply chain finance also sees Deere leveraging its scale by working with banks to offer dynamic discounting programs. Deere extends early payment options to its Tier 1 suppliers in Mexico and Europe, securing favorable pricing in exchange for accelerated cash flow. Simultaneously, the company pilots blockchain-based provenance tracking for critical components, ensuring the authenticity of parts and reducing the risk of counterfeit items entering the supply chain. These fintech innovations aim to bolster supplier loyalty while mitigating operational risk in an expanded global network. Meanwhile, insurance and risk management strategies adapt to shifting exposures. Deere's captive insurance subsidiary broadens its mandate to underwrite political risk insurance for assets in jurisdictions prone to sudden policy changes. Meanwhile, catastrophe coverage models incorporate new variables like cross-border transportation disruptions and regional natural disasters intensified by climate change. Sultry summers in Central America now factor into production capacity planning, as do the winter freeze-thaw cycles of Eastern Europe that can impede logistics. Deere's integrated risk dashboard flags potential hotspots before they escalate into crises. On the philanthropic front, Deere's foundation launches the Greenfields Initiative, funding sustainable agriculture projects in areas near new manufacturing sites. Programs include soil health workshops in Hidalgo State, Mexico, water management research in the Danube Basin, and youth ag-tech hackathons in São Paulo, Brazil. By tying community investment to local needs, Deere seeks to foster goodwill and social license to operate, ensuring that factory expansions translate into measurable community benefits rather than perceptions of economic extraction. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us what your thoughts are on John Deere moving abroad? What impact will this have? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.